activity. We don't have a very large production to promote this portal. We have about 35,000 do quite well. We're now planning to make a proposal. We have to consider it
show you how things are going now.
ICT and still has a
In Shibboleth, there's also that there's
less
production
visible
to use.
and quite well.
I use it quite
We're now planning make a
to show you how things are going now.
ICT and still has
In Shibboleth,
the last
there's also that
activity we started this year is the home office project. This project goes and this project
Thank you, Diego.
improvises
So today I hope to do a little bit of a discussion, just me. I know I have jet lag.
home office project, and that could also be mobile. This improvisation is all done because
Thank you, Diego. And I'm getting old. Thank you, Tom. Today I intend to provide an update, demonstration, discussion.
For example,
Thank you, Diego.
firewalls,
And I'm getting old. Thank you, Tom. Today I intend to provide an update,
instructions like that. We have high expectations of this, for example.
Thank you, Diego.
As it started this year.
I'm getting old.
Only this year, I'll tell you more about this instructions like that. We have high expectations of this, for example.
Thank you, Diego.
So to conclude my presentation, reaching the end user is a complex range. There isn't one method or one activity that can answer the problem.
We learned early on.
I think it has to be a mix of activities. Reaching the end user is a complex communication activity. One end user, like that. Like I said, we don't have the answer yet. It's still right mix. Like I said in my activities,
We also, since we're higher in the
we now look at policy plans for following for years. Like I said, we don't have you see that right mix. When we can towards the end, like I said, it's becoming more and more important. We now take the separate department, only focus following the end for what do they want.
In the last case, of course, whether this belongs to the work group or whatever, you
What can we offer them?
resource and you identify.
We are already more important.
So each of these ways of preventing the ways to handle it. I would like to say, let's deal with all this in common. In the last case, of course,
And the last point I would like to
work group or whatever,
put your attention to
in this first portion of this, there's various components. I got into the individual components, but I like each of these
we are working on the task force
But
right now.
what I'm really trying to show
There
here
is
is
a boss
these
session
components here, this
6
is
o'clock today. And the last point I would like and this
components here, this is often like this is various
force.
components. I got into the individual components, but I like
We are working
keeping these two topics separate. Often we get these things confused, and this is one of the things that we really wanted to stress in the development of this technology. Authentication is just simply proving who you claim to be. Authorization is the gaining of information about some entity so that a decision about what you can do can then be made. Okay? In the case of Shibboleth, it actually really doesn't make any decisions. Shibboleth is involved in this second phase here. The attribute authority is delivering attributes back to the target so that the target can make a decision. Shibboleth is not actually, the protocol here is not really making any decision. Maybe we need to talk a little bit about the components. You've got an individual going to visit the resource. They hit something called the shire. So this is at the web server level. The Shire is a Shibboleth indexical referencer. We have to come up with cool terminology, right? An indexical reference is basically something, let's call it a handle, that represents someone. And it really doesn't show who they are. So since you do not have a handle when you hit the SHAR says, we need to first go get your identity. Okay? You need to be authenticated. So we go to something called a WAIF. That is the Where Are You From server. You can imagine that that's simply a web page that lists out a number of sites that you might belong to. You select which one you belong to. When you do that, you're then taken to the handle service. So really, we're just back one slide. When you hit the handle service, that is a web-protected resource in which whatever technology you're using on your campus will then be employed to authenticate you. So if you have a local web login service, a web single sign-on, what have you, that might get kicked in right now. And then you would enter in your user ID and your password, a certificate, challenge response, whatever's appropriate for your institution. When you've authenticated, you can then gain access to the handle service. The handle service is a simple little thing that generates a handle. It's a very large number. That very large number might get stowed in a database over here for later reference. The handle is then given back to the Shire in a response that basically says, you've been authenticated, here's the handle, and here's the attribute authority that you should go talk to. We've not given up your identity at this point. All that we're showing is that you've been authenticated. The Shire will then pass it off to the SHAR, the handle. The SHAR, Shibboleth Attribute Requester, will then go and pass the handle back to the attribute authority saying, give me stuff about this handle. Whatever that stuff is, prior arrangement between the target and the origin, that's what a club or a federation is all about, whatever the agreement is. And then the attribute authority will go and collect information, maybe out of an enterprise directory, maybe out of some other database, what have you, and take that information and pass it back to the SHAR. The SHAR takes those attributes that have been collected, hands it off to a resource manager that might then go and collect other information locally, whatever's needed, maybe play a role in making a final decision, might call Permis or SPOCP that we'll hear about. Other things have to make decisions, but ultimately then it gets handed off to the application, which could just be a simple web page or a whole complex web-based application. That's the essence of Shibboleth. And if you have questions, feel free to ask. So because this is an international conference, I'd like to show this picture too. This was developed by Switch. I hear there's a version of this with moving parts that I'd like to get my hands on. But this is essentially the same thing, viewed a little bit differently. In terms of the trust, where's the trust in all of this? Well, the trust does not exist between the browser and the web server, the target. The trust is on the back end between the servers. So when we put our central IT hats on, we have to deploy this technology, right, to the entire institution, thousands of people. How are you going to make this work? Because, gee, if you have to deploy a PKI, there's all these things you got to worry about. It gets hard to deploy a PKI. Well, if it's all on the back end and on the servers, that's us. We should be able to handle that. The users shouldn't really have to know much to be able to play in this game.
When you say Shib engine, that's the stuff at the resource side end?
That's the target side, yes. So in general, this is the target side. That's the origin side.
But there is actually another bit of the trust model, and that is that the...
Wait, I think they want you to have a microphone for the streaming.
There is another implicit bit in the trust model, and that is that the target web server actually implicitly trusts the Shib engine, because the Shib engine is giving it these attributes and saying, these attributes belong to this user, believe me. And then the target web server makes a decision based on those attributes.
As is the case with any authentication technology that is bolted onto any web server today. So it really is nothing new, but you're absolutely right. In terms of milestones, we like to keep track of stuff. So there's a whole list here. We started out in February of 2000, and where we are now is down here. Version 0.8 was put out beginning of March. That's what's out there now, and what I'm going to be demonstrating today, if everything goes right. Version 1.0 will be out at the end of this month. We're fairly confident that that's going to happen. 1.1, we've got conversations going on as to what should be in 1.1, and maybe 1.2, kind of like HTTP. That'll kind of be it. That's kind of our hope, because then that means we all can move on to other things. So the code status, probably what's most important to talk about here is 0.8 to 1.0 and why we were supposed to have things out at the end of at the beginning of April, and why we decided to delay the April distribution. And that's because the SAML 1.1 specs are coming to a close, and the decision was made by those who were involved in the process, most notably Scott Canner and Bob Morgan, as well as Steve Carmody, that there are significant changes in 1.1 that dramatically improve the security of SAML, which is the Security Assertions Markup Language. And those messages that get passed back and forth between the target and the origin, those are SAML messages. So anything that we can do to improve the security of the environment, well, that's a good thing, because we're in the middleware business and we have to think about security. And those changes were rather significant in that they're not backward compatible. So given that this stuff really isn't out in the world today, you're on that development cycle. We've all dealt with the software. Gee, when do you decide to make something go live, et cetera? It was one of those judgment decisions that I personally think was the right decision. So we're going to be going with SAML 1.1 at the end of the month. Even though the spec has not been formally approved, Bob and Scott happen to be on the design team with Oasis on SAML. So we're fairly confident that we'll be able to meet the spec. On the course management front, we have early adopters with WebCT, WebAssign. NC State is the partner there. Blackboard demonstrated at the Internet 2 member meeting that their product can be SHIB enabled. So they demonstrated that it can work. Now, when it's actually going to be in the product, that's a whole other story. I think at best we may be looking at next spring. So this is where, as I believe Lynn was talking about, getting vendors to come along, depending upon the development cycles, et cetera, that can be a challenging, highly challenging task. And OKI is the Open Knowledge Initiative. I know that they have been told to do the SHIB thing, and they will do the SHIB thing. I don't think they've actually done the SHIB thing. Am I correct on that, Ken?
Right. They're ever closer. They're trying to hire the position.
They're ever closer, and they're trying to hire someone to do it. Okay. Probably the smartest thing that we did in the Shibboleth project was to attack the library community with this technology. In the library community, there's not a whole lot of risk that if someone who gains access shouldn't gain access. Have you really done any serious damage? No. But does the library community want to be able to leverage centralized authentication and be able to better manage the various web content providers out there? Yes. So there was a good marriage here in terms of the library community and us, the IT community, coming together to try and solve a common problem. This is what we call that low-hanging fruit. And it's been a wonderful partnership. We've been working with a number of vendors in the space, which, well, on the participant side, these are a number of schools that are involved in the project, and others are coming on. I can speak for, I've just switched to Duke University, and Duke is coming on with a project also in the Research Triangle. I believe that there's a number of institutions in Europe that are now coming online with wanting to do Shibboleth, and we've heard a bit about Athens and so on. On the vendor side, there's EBSCO. They jumped in very soon and were very easy to become SHIB-enabled and have been a good partner in all of this. Elsevier, I guess the way I've heard Elsevier described is they're kind of the Microsoft of the web content world. They're large, and it takes them a long time to figure things out, and their development cycle is very slow. So they have said that they intend to do SHIB. It's a matter of getting it in the pipeline. OCLC is supposed to be there, but there's some technical issues they need to work out. We've got SFX, and JSTOR has, in case you haven't heard, they've basically said they want everything to be Shibboleth. They've got, 1,600 schools around the world that are accessing JSTOR. It would be nice if it was done all one way. McGraw-Hill, Innovative, Triple I, they're involved in interlibrary loan and those kinds of systems. And then there's consortial efforts. We heard about Athens. There's also in the Washington, D.C. area, WRLC, which is the Washington Research Libraries Consortium. So others are getting into the mix as well. Ken.
Michael, let me just add one interesting aspect to that previous list. Many of those people want to move into role-based access control. And I want to set a forward reference to the next session where we're going to talk about, is that even reasonable to consider in an international framework or even a single national framework? But it's a ready-made environment for roles such as librarian for music to have special privileges at the content providers in terms of cataloging and other aspects. So there's a lot of potential in that.
And I think that's a good point, and that very much gets into what we talked about yesterday in the directory session regarding, what terminology are we going to apply to attributes to describe these affiliations or roles or whatever you want to call it. Developing these taxonomies is probably going to be the hardest problem. And again, it's a problem even within one country. So. When you deploy Shibboleth, it doesn't mean that it's without issues. So, you might have to authenticate to gain access to a service, but are there cases in which you should not have to authenticate in order to gain access to a service? For example, you walk into a library. By, at least for us, the mere fact that you're standing in the library means that you gain access to whatever the library has licensed, whether or not you're a member of the institution. I mean, this is an issue for us in our state schools. You might have to have a particular case of access to universal service. We have a private library. The library is open. Anybody can walk into it. They therefore have the right to gain access. Is for us, how do we actually, how do we bypass
people who we would
using the same
aren't necessarily
technology?
disabled.
No one necessarily deploys one technology for the library. If you're sitting in the library, another technology.
The way that we solve most of their disabled. There's no reason
You also have the problem if you're on campus. We have a private library. We're enjoying today and gaining access to the library because it's all IP access.
It's a blind user, so they can't see the screen. What you can do is a screen reader
because there are schools in which they've got one technology who want to do their work on a mountain. They're not physically in the library. They're not physically on campus. They should be able to gain access to this content too. So VPNs then become the answer to everything.
It's a blind user.
Trying to identify applications for the research community. We're looking at issues around security, resource management, of course, with the bandwidth as a resource, and also as a clearinghouse for information resources. The next slides just have a bit of what has been identified with this group. There are some important work and testing that's going on right now in particularly two applications, and research very interesting for Ryan there, that is the Internet community as a clearinghouse, reworking, rewriting. The next slide accidentally videos like this identified that it would also be important in the work and testing that's going on right now in so in conclusion, I think here's the we're seeing a lot of stuff happening in this space. We're seeing actually interesting emergence that including and also I feel was earlier here's looking in our institution. I think there's still standards and market seeing a lot of chemistry various spaces. Seeing companies that have added interesting wages, but I believe uniquely different like what I've been inspired this year. And finally, I like to say that in terms of what I'm thinking, also I guess the community, standards and market seeing a lot of chemistry.
I'm going to try and access a Shibboleth protected website. Please ignore the security alerts regarding certificates. All this stuff is done over SSL, so you have to deal with that a little bit. So I tried to access that website. And what happened under the covers here is that website says, you don't have the right stuff. That's accessing the Shire. I do not have a handle. It has redirected me to the WAIF. Now, if you look way up here, you'll see it says waif.internet2.edu. So this is the where are you from server. If I click on this little drop-down list, you see there's just a bunch of schools here. This is the current federation. It's our test federation. Now I'm going to say I belong to Example State University. So now I'm now telling this environment this is where I'm from. When I click select, it then redirects me over to the handle server, eventually. The handle server is, as we said before, it is a protected website. So now I go and I have to do the authentication thing to whatever's protecting that handle server. So I'm going to enter in that magical user ID and password, which of course could be using any other technology. The Shibboleth handle is then generated, so we've got some debugging messages turned on. And now I go back to that target website. All the right stuff is there, and it gets passed off to the application. And you'll see that my WebCT demo user is up here, and I'm going to go and access this particular link. But the point is that I've gained access to this website. I never gave it my password, and in this case, it is getting my identity. But you could imagine that maybe the only piece of information that I'm passing off is maybe member of institution. So I'd be an authenticated user proving that I'm a member of a group and never saying who I really am. And from a library perspective, that's a very powerful feature. So let me click on the Shibboleth demo course, which just brings up a bunch of stuff. And from here, I'll go and access one particular web content provider, EBSCO. Now, in many respects, you can say, on this one I want to point out, so I've accessed the Shibboleth handle server again. So here it is. I accessed yet another site, went through that entire process, but I didn't have to get authenticated this time because we all belong to the same federation, if you will. So I'm now going from one site to another around the world without necessarily having to re-authenticate.
But the SHA was involved again.
All those Shibboleth components were involved again. It's only involved at the beginning of the session. It's at that authentication and authorization phase. When you get beyond that, now you're operating at application speeds, if you will. So once I'm in the application, I've gotten through the Shibboleth steps and all of this, Shibboleth is done. So here I've accessed this EBSCO website, and you can see Shibboleth demonstration account. So my identity was gotten again. The original WebCT account, that login, had nothing to do with this. It was going through that whole process that we just saw. In some sense, you can say, gee, you're accessing web pages. Yeah, this stuff, to demonstrate, it's pretty boring. We're accessing web pages. Big deal. The issue really is how we go about doing it, the infrastructure that you have to have in place, and the benefits of having all this in place. And it's putting forth that whole mantra of all of middleware, at least as we in Internet 2 see it. It's getting an understanding about on your campus, identifiers, directories, authentication and identification processes that you use on your campus. How do people, when they come in, prove that they are who they claim to be? It's an issue for us because, gee, if all you do is present a Social Security number, how do you know that's really the right Social Security number? Lots of issues for us. It might be easy for you. Steve Carmody took a few minutes and Shibboleth enabled a QuickTime streaming server. So as you can see, we go through the process again. And now we're accessing what is arguably some more interesting content.
Yet many composers have tried to take musical
Of course, it's Walt Disney.
and give them a pictorial meaning.
Walt's
Are there
original
copyright
idea
issues
was
here?
that Fantasia would be a continuing
Fair use,
work in
we claim.
progress.
So not a problem. Disney doesn't care about copyright. And then, of course, you can see that...
That's because he's dead.
but his lawyers aren't. Here's JSTOR. Now, I could navigate my way through JSTOR, but I'm just going to ask you to trust me that this works. So we have a number. Well, there it is. Shibboleth kicks in, and we go through the authentication again. Now, if we were using certificates that were common, then some of these dialog boxes will go away, part of a number of the problems associated with middleware. So that is essentially, that's the simple techie version of a demo. Okay, I can tell you that Ken will give you a demo with a story that goes along with it that is really quite intriguing. There's aspects of it that probably don't translate very well outside the United States, so kind of why it wasn't done. Let me close that. So the demo worked. Yeah. Next steps. Obviously, we have issues in terms of converging with other efforts that are going on. We have PAPI, we have PERMIS. So if Shibboleth is going to be collecting attributes, we'd like to have something that would process that stuff and allow for good policy to be developed and interpreted and passed on to the application. And things such as PERMIS and SPOC-P might help us achieve that. Could Shibboleth be used as a web ISO solution and in turn solve an end-tier problem? We claim that Shibboleth could be used, well, as we know, Shibboleth is used to pass on attributes. One attribute that you could pass along might be a Kerberos ticket. And now if you're passing tickets onto portals, portals need to access things beyond it in order to present a unified view. Now you might be solving the end-tier problem that has been rather elusive. What is a federation? How do we define it? What about sub-federations, federation clusters, super-federations? There's a lot of issues here, and we've talked about this in various ways over the last couple of days. Federations, while they're important to Shibboleth, it's not a Shibboleth-specific concept. Federations, this concept applies to PKI, and it's going to apply to just about any community that we think about trying to deal with in the electronic world. I just think things have gotten to the point where we can think about it in a sufficiently mature way that maybe federations is the next way to really think about things. So it's not just a Shibboleth concept. We've got Shib the architecture versus Shib the web service. So, gee, how do we extend this to be more than just going after simple web pages? We've got, again, the technology, and we've got these trust issues that really sit behind federations. The famed digital rights management. There are those out there that claim patents to anything that represents authorization and digital rights. So is there a problem here? There may not be a problem. Peer-to-peer, of course, is begging for federated administration as well. We've got privacy management systems that we're trying to develop to help us on the user end and on the server end of dealing with the Shibboleth technology. And just one example of this might be a personal information manager that lives over at Brown. It's a prototype of this. So being that Shibboleth, as of this moment, works on any web server as long as it's Apache, not true. It's about to be IIS2 in terms of the target. So we're trying to extend our reach a little bit there. But if you're in the Apache world, you've got this tool that might be helpful in using a web page to generate those nasty .htaccess files so that users can manage their own content. Could be a very powerful tool. If it's got this little logo on it from the Brown perspective, that means it's WebAuth enabled. Well, that could be Shibboleth enabled. And, well, I just showed that. And then you've got some ideas that are kicking around on other privacy management systems. You know, what site do you want to access? What attributes might you be able to choose? What values might you want to release? Maybe you want to keep track of this stuff. There's a lot of things getting kicked around. Solutions are hard in this space, but probably doable. And then as a last slide, so as we talk about Shibboleth as a way of bringing together federations and so on, how does this possibly fit into a larger environment? We heard this morning Peter Alterman talking about what the federal government is up to. The federal government developed the Federal Bridge Certificate Authority, and they've got agencies associated with that in terms of cross-certifications and so on. Fortunately, we don't have time to really talk about this technology, although I know some of you are familiar with it. But here we've got in common, which might be a Shibboleth-related federation. Well, Shibboleth under the covers would employ PKI to maybe digitally sign things for that part, additional trust factor, as well as, since SSL is involved between these servers, so you have confidence in who you're talking to, well, that's another form of PKI. And if everybody's going up against the same root certificate authority, to keep it simple, then that's one aspect of a federation. So as we look at it here, some of these things might be represented as certificate authorities, or arguably from the grid perspective, even virtual organizations. And the grid of virtual organization is essentially represented by a certificate authority. Well, if we can get these various things to plug into a higher ed bridge certificate authority, and the bridge certificate authority cross-certifies with the federal bridge as well, we might be able to begin the building of a global PKI, in which maybe not so much the end users will see the PKI, but at least the infrastructure can then be tied together. And we have some technology that would be able to allow us to develop trust between our organizations. And then you have the users use something like a Shibboleth or a PAPI or what have you to gain access to the overall environment. So it might be PKI that really ties things together underneath, and maybe the users never really see it. Just one possibility. So that's basically it. That's Shibboleth in a nutshell. Any questions? Thank you. It'll come up. Nope.
There are various levels of information that the organization can release to the target. It can be just that, yes, this person is an organization person, or yes, this is this person and has a certain position.
Yes.
Does the user know beforehand, before they hit the target and ask for a service, do they know how much information their organization is going to release for them?
So essentially the question is, because I don't know if it got out there for video land, when a user accesses a target, do they know what information is going to be released to that particular target? Part of that is a federation problem, and how that federation will express it in what are called attribute release policies. And what we were showing here, or attempting to show, in something like this, would be how a user would be able to view their attribute release policy if they cared. Because Users may not care, right? But if they care, they should be able to go and look at their attribute release policies and know, okay, when you go to visit Yahoo, you're going to give out the Social Security number. Or when you go and you visit EBSCO, you're really just giving out the member of institution attribute.
So the table you're showing there is stored at the organization, and the user can check this out. And assumingly there are entries there for each and every target that I may possibly hit?
Yes. The attribute authority, one concept that might exist is at the attribute authority there might be a service called My AA, My Attribute Authority. So you'd be able to then log in and look at your attribute release policies. There may be some attribute release policies that you can't modify because they're institutional release policies, because the institution has certain relationships internally as well as externally. And maybe there will be a default attribute release policy that says only release the fact that you are a member of the institution, and that if anything else is to be given up, that maybe there needs to be some dialogue between the user and the AA to get that rectified.
Sounds good.
Yep.
Well, do you have another short question? We have time for one more question or comment. Okay.
Wow. With jet lag, I guess I did well.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Well, next speaker is Roland Hebber, who is now working for Umea University, as said it more or less. Okay. Well, Roland is the author of one of the authorization engines that has been mentioned before,